Planes hitting New York City, and thousands now are dead. It was Arab terrorists, this is what you said. Well, if that is the truth, then what have you got to hide? What were you doing on the day all those people died? Where were the fighter jets ordered by the FAA?
For 3 days in March of 2004, an unprecedented event brought forth an alternative vision of September 11th. 1,000 activists gathered in San Francisco for Phase 1 of a Citizens 9/11 International Inquiry. This was a culmination of a growing movement seeking to discover and reveal the facts and the truth about the events of September 11th, 2001. The inquiry process will continue with Phase 2 in Toronto at the end of May. The main hall for films and speakers was the historic Herbst Auditorium.
9/11 websites sprung up all over the place. And this amazing sort of conversation and cooperation began happening amongst researchers all over the world.
The films Aftermath and The Great Deception were screened along with excerpts of Painful Deceptions, Arsenal of Hypocrisy, War and Globalization featuring Michel Chossudovsky, Liberty Bound, and Guerrilla News Network's Flight 93 and Ammo for the Info Warrior. Along with film showings, a lengthy list of distinguished authorities and activists spoke. The speakers included Carol Brûlé, Barry Zwicker, Mike Rupert, Paul Thompson, Ian Woods, Jim Mars, Ellen Mariani, and Phil Berg. Musician David Rovitz added his special energy to Friday evening.
Say when you told the Air Force to stand down, not to intercept, did you plan to let it happen, or are you just inept?
These presenters spoke on a variety of topics, with the common theme of 9/11. Here are some highlights.
The purpose of 9/11 and encore 9/11 type events is to keep the public malleable through fear. A fearful public will countenance a reduction of its liberties in return for promises of greater security. If the 9/11 planners have been high-fiving over their success, they're engaging in hubris, taking credit where it is not due. Because those who conspired to concoct this toxic trick and inflict it did not succeed because they created a seamless magic trick. They succeeded only because of the virtual total complicity of the mainstream media, our mental jailers. It's from the mainstream media that most people get most of their information most of the time on most subjects. So those who control the output of the mainstream media control the brainstem of our collective consciousness. When those charged with being skeptical inquirers are neither skeptical nor do they inquire, the only phrase for it is deep complicity. As author and activist Arundhati Roy writes in the current issue of Global Outlook magazine, the magazine of our movement, quote, "It is important to understand the corporate media do not just support the neoliberal project, they are the neoliberal project. It is structural, it's intrinsic to the economics of the mass media." But there's another answer to the question. Where are we now and where are we going? I think that now we are actually on the threshold of hope, because such an edifice of illusion embedded in and promotive of an earth-destroying economy is one which cannot be sustained. Something has to give, and give soon. Something is stirring among the masses designated to sleepwalk toward oblivion. Something is stirring even among some of the prison guards, even among a few of the illusioneers. So where are we in the 9/11 skeptics movement? Well, I think our job is to know the landscape as well as we can, to grasp the largest picture to the best of our ability, to plan, as Michael Rupert says, a roadmap from where we are to a better place. Our job is to nourish realistic hope that we can and will, as 9/11 skeptics, play a pivotal role in helping the old death system to itself die the death it unconsciously seeks. Our job is to prepare for the chaos to come and help lay the groundwork for the more honest and sane world that will be built upon the rubble and courage of the present. As 9/11 skeptics, we are called by history to be our best and most effective selves, whatever role we play. We are charged with doing our utmost to save our planetary home. So that's where I think we 9/11 skeptics are now. We are more awake than we ever have been. We have much more waking up to do, and especially we owe it to our fellow citizens to rub the sleep out of our eyes, out of their eyes. That was 10 minutes exactly. Okay.
9/11, I think, obviously, since that is the underlying cause célèbre of everything else that's going on, the Patriot Act, Homeland Security, the stripping of the Constitution, invasions of Afghanistan, Iraq, and future invasions of Iran, Saudi Arabia, who knows what, all of that goes back to 9/11. And if 9/11 was not on the level, then none of the preceding events are going to be on the level. So I think you have to start with the initial impetus.
Let us first address what I would like to call the 9/11 myth. It is, I submit, a fantastic construct. It is the story of the 19 hijackers, bin Laden, the laptop in the cave, and so forth. This myth has now become the basis of the government of the United States. The two are inextricably linked. And the survival of the myth is, of course, the key to the re-usurping campaign of the current tenant of the White House. And I would submit to you that the overriding political priority for every person of goodwill on this planet is to dismantle this myth, to critique it, to deconstruct it, and to put it into the dustbin of history.
We've heard a lot of theories about why the official story of 9/11 does not hold water, and what I'm going to present to you is 26 of those. Flight 77 was able to fly uninterrupted for 1 hour and 45 minutes after detection. Was the Air Force on stand-down orders? No steel-structured building in the world has ever collapsed due to fire. The mysterious collapse of Building 7. World Trade Center Building 7 was not reported to be on fire until 3 p.m., and thanks to Eric Hufschmidt for his research on this. These fires were relatively small and appeared on floors 7 to 12, and 12. In less than 3 hours, the whole building came tumbling down into a vaporized cloud of dust at 5:25, even though no airplane had hit it and no debris had fallen on top of it. We do know that some of the 9/11 hijackers were imported and trained by the U.S. military. Well, it took 14 months for President Bush to set up a public inquiry into 9/11, the most significant terrorist attack in the history of the American nation. The Pearl Harbor Commission only took 9 days to be formed. The JFK Commission took 7 days. The Titanic Commission took 6 days. The Challenger Disaster Commission took 7 days. The entire Bush agenda, as we know and we've studied this weekend, is based entirely on the myth of 9/11. If the official story is found to be illegitimate, Bush and company could find themselves behind bars. Yeah. There is a force more powerful, and it is us, we the people. Together, we can break the consensus.
Their corruption is so outrageous that it won't last forever. And people see the corruption, and that's one reason why we're here. And how are we going to get rid of this corruption? My personal thing is I think that it's going to take nonviolence, peaceful demonstrations, because there are way more of us than there are of them. And we can take back our republic with pots and pans. And like he says there, he says, when I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love has always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time, they can seem invincible. But in the end, they always fall. Think on it, always.
9/11 was not a failure of low-level bureaucrats, but an executive-level stand-down. On September 11th, while 4 planes were hijacked and 2 crashed into the Twin Towers, while people were burning and jumping out of buildings, G.W. Bush, Commander-in-Chief, was in a second-grade classroom in Sarasota, Florida, reading about a pet goat. To date, the administration has presented no evidence that it was bin Laden and al-Qaeda. Remember, they couldn't trust us with that information before they rushed in to destroy Afghanistan again. No tapes, nothing but an alleged hijacker's passport, which miraculously survived the rubble of the World Trade Center. The 9/11 Commission is officially called the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States. The Bush administration had already written the plotline, and these 10 independent commissioners are merely reading the script. It looks like Karl Rove called central casting and found Washington insiders with so many conflicts of interest, so much to lose in their high-powered jobs, They are guaranteed to play their role and keep the truth under wraps. Max Cleland said of the 9/11 Commission that its deal with the White House about seeing its presidential briefings is a sham, it's disgusting, and America is being cheated. Kyle Hens, co-founder of Citizens Watch, which monitors the Commission, has called the Commission spineless and operating under a dark veil of secrecy and denial. I simply call it the Cover-Up Commission. Like the Warren Commission, the 9/11 Commission is turning up some information that can help us piece together the real story, so it cannot be dismissed out of hand. But the real benefit I see of the Commission is that it may be accumulating quite a record of those who may have misled or lied to the Commission. Remember, cover-up is another name for obstruction of justice. Perhaps the international inquiry, which we're forming, might consider adding some of these commissioners to those involved in the cover-up. Truth is the only way to healing and peace.
The idea that the World Trade Center collapsed, the leveling of the Twin Towers and Building 7 resulted from jetliners impacting the towers is the core of the big lie of 9/11/01. While the tower collisions, the Pentagon assault, and the crash of Flight 93 were horrific, deadly events, it was the total destruction of the towers over an hour after they were hit by the airplanes, in the case of the North Tower, that killed by far the most people. The repeated airing of the photogenic South Tower collision and immediate historical revisionism conflating the collisions with the collapses concealed the fact that the explosive disintegrations of the towers were the heart of the psychological assault on the populace. The shocking explosions of the signature towers were the key psychological underpinning of the war on terror. Despite the non sequitur of steel frame buildings converting themselves into dust and shredded steel, the jetliner hits tower, tower falls down meme proved difficult to pierce. I found the collapse of Building 7 an effective antidote to the conditioning surrounding the collapses of the Twin Towers. Therefore, I will first present a brief segment on Building 7, then proceed to examine the collapse of the Twin Towers.
I would like to not only talk about Pakistan's role in the plot, but also what that tells us about the role of the U.S. government potentially in the plot in 9/11. In the early 1990s, the ISI created the Taliban in Afghanistan pretty much from scratch. The Taliban didn't exist. They gave them money, weapons, everything, sort of pushed them over the border, and they put them into power after a tremendous amount of support behind them. And it's pretty much accepted by all the mainstream media that the Taliban were the complete puppets of the ISI. Either that the US was directly involved with Pakistan and these other countries in the 9/11 plot and allowed it to happen or helped make it happen, or the US government was completely taken for fools, and then afterwards they covered up their foolishness and have actually, instead of punished these countries and these actors, they've actually rewarded them. And I would argue that personally I favor the first, but I would argue that in either case, this is really treasonous behavior to deceive the American people in this way, to let the true perpetrators of 9/11 go free, and in either case, it should lead to impeachment of President Bush. Thank you very much.
Many people wonder about how such a quote-unquote conspiracy could be carried out. They say, oh, thousands of people would have had to know. The answer is no. I have studied a great many covert operations. I have interviewed a great many covert operatives, and the fact is you don't need a whole lot of people to know. You need key people in key places. For the first reason, that there's something called compartmentalization, where you only have a person in one room working on a bolt, a person in another room working on a nut, a person in another room working on a screw, and nobody knows what the finished product looks like. That's metaphors for covert operations. But also, you only need a few people in key places. And here's another quote that from the Associated Press on August 13th. Fighter jets scrambled 67 times properly in the calendar year prior to 9/11. So we know from these events right now that at this point that at between 8:13 and 8:14 a.m. in the morning, we have confirmation, according to what the FAA would know, that Flight 11 had been hijacked, period. There is no question. At that point, immediately, the scramble order should have been issued. Over here at 8:46, 3 F-16s assigned to Andrew Air Force Base are flying air-to-ground strike training mission 200 miles from Washington. Instead of being ordered to D.C. at supersonic speeds, they return to base, slowly landing only after Flight 77 hits the Pentagon. They could have been in D.C. airspace within 10 minutes. So when you get to the bottom of all this, nobody did what they were supposed to be doing, and it shows very clear criminally negligent, at best, behavior. I think you have a clear case for conspiracy here. My plea to all 9/11 activists is that we have to find the sheet music so that we can all sing the same notes. I would submit to you that if I could make this case to you in 20 minutes, we can make the same case to the American people in 20 minutes, and if we keep it simple, we might be able to crack the nut that we need to crack, that we must crack to save our country, to save our planet, and our civilization. So ultimately, what I have to say to you is that as I look at this and as I've studied this and as I've worked 26 years to unravel this covert mechanism that governs our lives, I'm firmly convinced that what we are now faced with is a choice offered to us by our Creator. Either evolve or perish. Thank you.
Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand, and I will move the world. 9/11 is the longest lever, the greatest opportunity of our time. As John Buchanan, Republican candidate for president on a 9/11 truth ticket, has said, it's the mother of all issues. And I believe the truth of 9/11 will change our world more than any other single issue. The official story is a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy, 2 or more people. The official story is just a theory. It has never been proven. There has never been any kind of trial. Very little additional evidence has been added to the nearly immediate conclusions that were drawn within hours or a few days of 9/11. And any and all investigations that were for many months non-existent were and are being resisted, underfunded, ignored, stonewalled, and limited. So the official story is a conspiracy theory. So it's not a question of whether or not you believe in conspiracy theory. It's a question of which conspiracy theory you believe in. We're talking about an evolution and an awakening. 9/11 is part of a much bigger evolutionary spiritual awakening happening and accelerating throughout humanity. In part, we are currently doing some collective shadow work, exposing this darkness to the light. Shadow, the part of us that is not so pretty and that we don't want to show and talk about, but we're aware it exists and other people tell us about it. That same thing happens on a collective level, and we in fact call it the shadow government. And this needs to be exposed to the light if we're going to create the kind of world that we came here to create. So besides moving towards greater truth, we are challenged to move towards greater love and more healing, more forgiveness and more wisdom. We are enough, and we will succeed. Thank you.
Just prior to the opening of the inquiry, a presentation room upstairs was the site of a groundbreaking news conference, where many of the weekend's presenters gave brief summaries of their upcoming presentation.
This independent commission that was initially supposed to be headed by Henry Kissinger and now headed by Thomas Keane is failing to ask the proper questions about 9/11.
This is one of countless advance warnings that we have received reports about that are not being investigated by this commission.
It's an absolute disgrace, the fact that we have to get together to prod to find out the answers. We are now 2 1/3 years later, after 9/11. Not one person has been prosecuted. Not one military person has been even accused or been brought up for court-martial. I think one of the biggest problems when you say, why isn't the media covering this? The hard part is that the American citizens don't want to believe that our government would do something like this.
That every plane which deviates from its flight path and radio contact is not established with that plane, or there's a hijacking confirmed, military jets must be scrambled to intercept that plane to find out what was going on immediately. And if you look at the past record, which is documented in official reports of responses, US responses to previous hijackings and other such incidents, there is absolutely nothing like this that has happened before in the history of the United States. It's absolutely unprecedented. What happened on 9/11 was a violation of standard procedures.
9/11 was an international event. You know, it's literally not true that, quote, 3,000 Americans died that day, unquote. It's not a competition about victimhood, but people from 84 countries died that day, including 26 from Canada. So this is why we've linked together, we in Toronto, who are holding an international, and we're adding the word citizens now, inquiry into 9/11. We have linked hands across the border harmony and complementarity with San Francisco here. It makes it less likely they can call us anti-American up there, by the way.
We are here today to tell the rest of the world that no matter what the major media does, no matter what the government does, no matter what the financial interests governing this planet do, at this moment in time, we will not let 9/11 go. Thank you.
The rest of the weekend, the press conference room was both the location of 9/11 film showings and of additional speakers. An adjoining room hosted lively follow-up discussions with the Herbst presenters.
In the case of the towers, it was kind of like folded up on itself.
The tabling room enabled participants to sample and purchase the many books, videos, magazines, buttons, and other materials, and to interact one-on-one with the presenters.
You get above 2 minutes or so per page.
Who's behind the scenes? In other words, CIA.
Volunteers, participants, and organizers created a video production studio on location. At the close of each day, panels of presenters were convened for further discussions for the cameras.
My name is Blaine Mahan, and I'm here this evening to discuss one of the aspects of the September 11th truth movement, a creation called the Deception Dollar. I'm the artist that originally came up with the concept for the Deception Dollar.
During the inquiry, a march was organized to the mayor's office at San Francisco City Hall.
We have an idea right now for what we'd like to do, and anyone who wants to participate can do so. It's a fun family activity. We have prepared a letter to Gavin Newsom, the mayor of San Francisco, which we would like to deliver today. We're just going to walk up, I would say, in a solemn procession. It can be colorful, certainly. Up to the door. We're going to cross the street at the intersection properly and deliver it by hand to whoever is minding the store today. And this letter...
Dear Mayor Newsom, according to a report in the San Francisco Chronicle on September 12, 2001, your predecessor in office, Willie Brown, stated that on the evening of September 10th, he received a call from a source he described as his security people at the airport, advising him not to take a scheduled flight to New York City the next morning. Willie Brown got low-key early warning about air travel, SF Chronicle, September 12, 2001. We're concerned that this evidence may lead back to persons who had advanced knowledge of the September 11th attacks on New York and Washington. We request that you investigate whether Mayor Brown's source is known to San Francisco or Bay Area authorities, and that you take up contact with your predecessor to clarify the matter. Please note that the many indications that specific advanced warnings and prior knowledge of September 11th attacks circulated among certain groups, including 2 Newsweek stories that top officials at the Pentagon canceled travel plans for September 11th on the evening of September 10th, and reports of stock trading in put options on American Airlines and United Airlines, and other insider trading indicating advanced knowledge in the week prior to September 11th on international stock exchanges, including in San Francisco. For one listing, and then we give the Earl. We await a response, but that's
care of our contact.
Right. So it's conveniently located just across the street. So if you have 5 minutes and you'd like to join us, we would welcome your company.
If you'd like, I can accept it and make sure it gets to the Okay, take the letter.
Demanding these answers for the families as well as for the rest of the country who's been asked to send their sons and daughters to war and give up their civil liberties based on 9/11, the most horrendous yet least examined event in modern American history. It's time for the truth. We're sick of the lies, we're sick of the cover-up, and it's time that we got what we deserve, which is truth. Thank you.
Please walk with me. Please march with us silently, hopefully in Washington, we can get all the families to show the world what they've done to us for generations. I was on a plane 2 hours before my husband, who kissed me 3 times goodbye. I left as a married woman and came home as a widow. I have to do it. They can't speak. They are no more. So please walk with us. I am from the state of New Hampshire. We were on our way to my daughter's wedding, and he never made it. So I'm here today for all the 3,000 who were killed. I am ashamed of our government and what they've done. They have lied. They will do anything to obstruct our justice. I waited 2.5 years for justice, but it hasn't come forward. I can't do it alone, and it's people like you that are walking with me for your future, your grandchildren and your children, and whomever else is here in our country.
I'm very honored to be able to represent Ellen Mariani. I'm representing her on behalf of herself to seeking the truth for her late husband and for the other 3,000 people who were murdered on that day, and also all of you and everyone across the United States and around the world. Because what occurred on that day was terrorism. We have to figure out who did it, why it happened, and make sure it never happens again. George W. Bush, the Bush administration, was involved in the events of 9/11, and they must be held accountable.
During the final hours of Sunday afternoon, key participants presented the inquiry's findings and a call to action. Finally, the organizers of the Phase 2 inquiry in Toronto set the course for our immediate future this May in Canada.
Thank you for being here.
As the flames are rising higher, was this our latest Lusitania?